Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of, I don't know yet the name, the title of the podcast. I think should it exist or something. So anyway, I'm very excited to welcome Chris Morgan, President and Chief Data Officer at Mount Airy Technologies. Chris has spent his career building solutions that simplify complex data challenges, including platforms like Emissary, which revolutionize how business manage data pipelines, lineage, and reconciliation. With his expertise, Chris is making data accessible and actionable for everyone. Chris is great. Chris, it is great to have you here. Let's talk about your journey, how you get into where you are now.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Chris, you are aware of the format. Usually, we start with, the product which you have, which is Emissary, which is a data platform. It needs to have a backstory of why it was created. So if you would mind walk over, the history of what problems you're trying to solve and why, Emissary should exist.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Our story, Emissary, the idea of Emissary is more than 25 years old. Technology is much more much newer than that. But going back 25 years or so ago, I've been in the investment management space, financial services, my entire career. And I worked early on for a software company that saw lots of migrations onto their platform from old legacy technology. And for those that are viewers that were around, in the late 90s into the 2000s, there was still an awful lot of platforms that had been custom developed by companies, not software companies, but by insurance companies or investment management companies or the like. And they were just starting to migrate onto standard software, more vended software. And so I watched clients move from old legacy platforms onto, more standard vendor products. And we watched those clients build conversion programs to move data off of the old legacy and onto the new ones, over and over and over again.
Okay, so basically, sorry, so for interrupting. So basically what I'm hearing is that was back in the day where you would have a company which would have some sort of, mainframe or computer or server which runs some program, and then Oracle says like, hey, we have this database where now you can sort of like use us. The only thing which you need to figure out, you actually just to move the data or whatever from whatever hell you have into, like us. So I'm using Oracle as an example. So is that correct?
Yeah, I would say it's more akin to like an Oracle Financials. Less about a database itself and more about a true application.
Okay.
The things that these companies actually use to run their businesses, right?
Oh,
So
I see.
in our case, it would be things like investment accounting platforms, the place where these companies actually record the accounting for stocks and bonds and other investments that they are making. So in the investment management space, there's buying and selling of these assets in order to support whatever their business is, whatever their business model is. And all the systems that facilitate that trading, and then the recording and record keeping associated with those are the types of systems I'm talking about. So if you think about an investment management company, it's really the heart of, or the systems that are the heart of their business. So you really need to make sure that you're implementing them in a way that is intelligent and careful, and contains all of that historical data that they would need in order to continue to do business.
Interesting. So you like in around 2000s. Oh my God, I was back then. I was at school yet, and yeah. Okay, this is what I'm fascinated. Like when I was at school, I learned like things like FTP. And when I moved here in US, some of my coworkers was like, oh yeah, we know FTP. There was a company, FTP Incorporated, which the protocol was created just behind the corner. And I'm just fascinated how much technology was made at, like around here and stuff like that. So sorry. Okay. So around 2000s, so we noticed that there is a trend of data, like you need to move the data. So what did you do?
Yeah, so I actually founded a company that was a consulting company
Hmm.
that helped clients, move systems from old system to new system. And having watched these clients spend months and months and months just building conversion programs, building new data pipelines, new integrations between their systems and these new platforms, to us it just seems silly that they were basically, went from one investment shop to another. They were basically developing the same conversion programs
Mm.
and the same integrations. And for us, it was they were wasting millions of dollars and months of time developing these things. And so we had an idea for developing something that would be something we could leverage across all of that, those client base, that entire client base. So is there a tool that you could put in the hands of a business analyst, somebody who wasn't necessarily technical? They understood the data, they understood what it is that they needed to do and where it needed to go and that type of thing.
Hmm.
But maybe they had never coded for anything before, because that's largely the types of consultants that we employed. And so we started developing what at the time was named differently, but has become Emissary. And Emissary was really at the beginning just an accelerator for us to sell consulting services to these investment management shops.
Wow. Is there any more to the story, or are we jumping into, like,
Well, yeah. I mean, to the extent you want to go into it a little bit, I mean, ultimately, we did this for some time, and for
Mhm.
those that were around again for 2008, 2009, the financial services market imploded,
Okay.
and we had a really rough time of it, and we effectively shelved development and the progression of Emissary, for a couple of years there, while we were as a business trying to recover. And coming out of that, we finally reached a point where in 2011, our business had come back, and we ultimately were acquired by one of the big four to start and continue to develop a practice within the big four. And at that time, and it's changed over the last
Mhm.
10 or so years, but big four did not at the time. They had no interest in being software companies. They weren't interested in developing product. So they didn't seem to understand really the benefit of that accelerator. So the software just stayed
Mhm.
with that company and didn't go to with the acquisition to the big four. So it sat on a shelf, for a number of years. And I cycled through some other places. I ended up working at a fintech company that was doing things that were very, very similar to what we had already done. And what I
Mhm.
came to realize pretty quickly is that when we started developing Emissary, we were probably ahead of the market. People didn't understand at that time, non-technical people being able to develop, technical things. And so they really had a hard time getting their heads around it. It helped us sell consulting business, but at the time, we didn't even really think that it would be viable necessarily as a software product. But fast forward, to today, citizen user development, business user enabled tools. It's everything now, right? It's all about self-service for business users to be able to do these things, and that's effectively where we've evolved to. So back in 2000, late 2017, 2018, we revisited, the code base and have spent the last several years bringing it into, a truly native, truly current, tech stack.
That's wow. That's it's really fascinating. Something what you created, like many years ago, didn't really had a use case because people didn't understood that this is the way how you can do things. Like,
Yeah.
because the world was very different, and now like revisiting back to it after many years. So like 10 years passed, right? Like, like from 2008. Wow. So if I may ask before we go into sort of like, like how the Emissary looks like right now,
Yeah.
do you remember what pushed you to actually reviewing that, and was it hard to actually say like, well, this is what I want to do the full time?
Yeah. Yeah, so the company that I ended up going to work for, it wasn't even clear to me until the last interview what it is that they had,
Hmm.
and I hadn't forgotten about the promise of Emissary, but it was still in the back of my mind. But I hadn't really thought too much about, whether or not it was something that should or could have been brought into to today. And the company that I ended up working for was more in the data reconciliation space than the data integration space. And I spent a fair amount of time trying to tell the leadership of that company that I thought the bigger opportunity was not in the reconciliation space. I thought it was in the data integration space. And back in 2017, you think about some of the companies that are in the data pipeline space and the data platform space, they were either just getting started or they didn't exist. And I was very much an advocate for that. And when I ended up leaving that company, I said, you know what, I still believe this, right? I took that job thinking that was an opportunity to sort of prove out my thesis, which was, that these citizen user developed tools, these ways of allowing business analysts, people who really understood what it is they wanted to do, but couldn't necessarily code for it, if you provided them with the tools to do these powerful things, that they could. And so when I left that company back in I think it was late 2017 or 2018, I said, let's go look at what we had. I think that's an asset that is valuable and that could, in the integration space, provide some tremendous value. And yeah, go ahead.
So I also recall my career. So I was already working at that time, right? So
Yeah.
So I started doing data engineering around like 2015. Yes, 2015. And what I did notice as well is that at that time we did have like a Hadoop cluster running for us. And what you would do, you basically just build all the custom reports yourself, or maybe it would be connected, to some other platform. Would have our data warehouse. So my job would be to moving the data from one place to another. And then what I realized very quickly is just like we don't really have any self-service tools. And that was basically one of my things which I did at, like at my company, is I created a bunch of self-service tools for us to use, because as you told, at that time there was nothing, or like Airflow was just picking in like the superset. So this is like all open source projects, right? Like Superset also was just like starting the same, like the Spark was, still was sort of like a new students project on top of the Hadoop. And that's basically all of those things. So you're actually being, like upfront in all the data platforms. And that's really, really amazing. Wow. So, okay. So what's next?
Yeah. So, so I went back and I reviewed the code, and we haven't talked really any about my background. If 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, if you had asked me, often I get the question, are you a technical person or are you a business person? And my entire career, I would have told you that I'm a business guy. I'm an investment management business guy. I understand the business, very, very deeply, and I've got some decent technical chops. When I was in university, I was a computer science major for a hot minute, for a year and a half. I was a comp sci major. I learned how to code in Turbo Pascal. I wasn't very good at it. And the moment that the professor started talking about the amount of bytes flying through the CPU, said, I'm done. I'm not interested in this anymore. So I abandoned it. I knew all the concepts and everything. I could do some base level coding, but I hadn't coded since I graduated college, before I graduated college. And so, back in 2017, 2018, our old legacy code was VB8. So I had to learn the syntax around VB8.
Sorry.
Yeah.
VB, what is that?
Visual Basic 8.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I hope today it's a little bit better, right?
Oh, way, way better. Yeah. So we can talk about that as well. Yeah. So when we first started coding for Emissary, it was a web app, right? And so we coded it in, at that time, was the very first sort of, I think it was just as they were starting to call things .NET. But the only .NET was VB.NET, right? And it was really like VB8, I think VB9, something like that. So that's what we had originally coded things into. if you were to look at it today, you would go, oh my God, Chris, but that's the way that those web applications looked at that time, right? They were very unsophisticated as far as visual and the GUI was concerned. But when I went back to it, went back to the code base, you remember, 6 or 7, 8 years had passed since we had last touched the code. Fundamentally, the routines and the algorithms and everything else were all sound, right? They just really needed to be reimagined in, a current tech stack. So I initially upgraded everything from, VB8 to VB, .NET, I think it was, or whatever the .NET version was. And then very, very quickly realized that no, this needed to move to C#. So then we very, very quickly tried to migrate up to C#. And then we were in framework. So those technical people out there talking. And then we very quickly realized we shouldn't be in framework. We need to be in core. So today, Emissary is completely, cloud native app. It's coded in C#. It's core 9 currently. It sits right now. Our preferred framework is for it to sit on SQL Server, but we can sit on Postgres. There's a variety of things that we can do, but we've been very careful to not tie ourselves explicitly to a single cloud provider, right? The sort of the going in thesis for us, and remember, we have legacy tech that's been advanced, right? At least legacy thinking that has been advanced into the current world. So, our thought has always been Microsoft's been around for forever. The basis for their technology has been around forever. Let's start there and then advance ourselves into things that are more modern or more accepted or more growing in acceptance. I can land, a Microsoft-based, platform in any cloud, private or public. And certainly as we continue to evolve, like I said, things like being able to leverage, tools like Postgres as opposed to using a SQL Server or other database engines certainly is appealing.
Okay. So about the choice of the technology, it's still, and should go to the next stage about the tool itself, about the platform itself. But I'm just curious. So So going into basically Microsoft, and I don't know if that's the correct word. So your platform is right with the C#, which means that it's basically, as you mentioned yourself, it's used the SQL Server as sort of like the way on what it would be running, right? So is this choice was because of the industries you were pointing? You mentioned like a financial institution, so it's because their main thing runs on the Microsoft things. Is that's the reason behind all of that, or is just like something what you felt comfortable with, or was that like ISO, like the standards which is required by these institutions? Like what? Because why?
Great questions. Great questions. So, part of it is definitely the industry in which we are, right? And what is rightfully so a pretty risk averse industry, right? Highly regulated, right? Similar to healthcare, highly regulated. You don't want to get things wrong. And these are tried and true technologies that have long been accepted. But so yes, foundationally, these are technologies we could have probably dealt with Oracle from a back-end perspective or SQL Server. Those have long been sort of the mainstays within the financial services space. But Oracle has always been heavy and very expensive, to develop and to maintain and to own and all these types of things. But even moving into, when we started all of this, even like your AWSs and your cloud providers, we're really still pretty new, right, to providing the services, the cloud services that they offer. And, it's only been maybe 7 or 8 years now, if that, where I think AWS was the first really blessed cloud provider in the financial services space, right? They went a long way to making sure that they could build in the security and the trust for the industry, for the investment management industry to take hold there. Obviously, it's grown over time, but that's sort of where we've gone. Yeah.
So I remember that I was at one of the first AWS Summit days, and they were so proud about the certificates they got. And basically, hey, banks, hey, financial institutions, we're ready. Come on in, join us. Like, you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
yeah. So, yeah, I never, so early in my career, I was working in we were creating accountant app. So early in my career, it was created with Visual Fox Pro. So again, visual, like, so something.
Yep.
So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that sort of like was
Yep.
like a forgotten product, right? And
Yep. Yep.
back in the day, I remember, like I was really into like dealing what the government is saying, how the things needs to run, and that sort of like I was on top of all of those things. But then, similar to you and to us, like in 2008, I basically needed to change the job. I basically needed to go to what I considered a hobby. It's called coding web pages, and then
Yep.
basically I just
Yep.
stayed in that industry for like for many years. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're talking about Emissary, not about me. So
No, it's all good.
let's get to the next stage. Would you mind,
Sure.
like if you have something to share visually about, like, okay, so what does
Yep.
Emissary do? What type of the data platform it is?
Yeah. Let's do a quick share here. So I'll share a slide here, just sort of giving an overview. And
Hmm.
Emissary has evolved quite a bit. Since sort of the initial thoughts and what is it that we were solving for, and what you're seeing right here really is talks about some of the original core capability, right? So if I just sort of set the stage, on the left hand side, if you think about all of the various types of data formats and places where data might be coming from, either systems, and there are a couple of systems up there that are standard or mainstream sort of in my industry. But you also have, your JSON formats and your CSV formats and things that largely should be standard. And that if you're a developer, that many of
Yeah.
these, while they're supposed to be standard, aren't really standard. But you've got everything moving from the left to the right. And what Emissary originally was meant to do was really to build integrations, build data pipelines, to build data conversion, capability to move data around, right? And not just move it around, but to then turn apples into oranges, right? Because no system on the left-hand side really consumes data exactly the same on the right-hand side. And,
Correct.
what we're really doing is, the goal for Emissary from the outset was, can I take data from anywhere in any format and then send it anywhere? Can I transform that in a way that allows it to go anywhere? And that's really what we've built. And in the middle of all of this, right, certainly we've got the ability, because we're capturing, understanding the structures, understanding the formats of the data, we're capturing the data itself, we're able to examine it, we're able to transform it. We can compare the data, and then we can even reconcile, elements of the data. And I think there's a distinction, certainly in the financial services space, between comparing data to validate that the data looks the same versus actually reconciling financial data to make sure that things like bank balances foot, right? My opening balance was this. I had all these transactions, and the closing balance is that. So, this is really just meant to sort of describe that and sort of that initial core capability. But from this, Emissary really has started to grow over the last couple of years.
So this is, I think, like we talked a little briefly about that, and that's, like this is why I called it as a data product. So right now I don't yet see a data product. Right now I see like an ETL framework, which job is to basically transform data from one place to another. So things have changed, right? So like
Yeah.
how it is now.
Yeah, so things have changed, right? There is much more that's needed in order to even be competitive in the space, right? There's, an increasing number of purely ETL tools, and in the financial services market, it's not just about integrations anymore, right? It's about visualization as well, right? So it's okay, Chris, it's okay that Emissary can move data around. There's a lot of tools that can do that. But how do I visualize what's happening there, right? Okay. Can I keep track of the data that's there? Can I understand what's happening? So as things have grown, we've started to layer in, visualization. So we've integrated some open source BI capability into Emissary, drag and drop, user self-service user, dashboarding capabilities, all embedded within Emissary, as well as, integrated scheduling capabilities as well, right? And I think importantly in the financial services market, and, I assume that much of the same is true, with other products. In the financial services space, there's a growing interest in separating yourself and isolating yourself from the core applications that you're on. So, I talked a little bit earlier about, these migrations onto things like investment accounting platforms and trading platforms. Clients are growing increasingly interested in not being subjected to their vendors, and therefore not being subjected to the data models that their vendors provide to them. So what they're ultimately looking for as well is, can I bring my own model, right? Instead of BYOB, right? BYOM. Can I bring my own model to the game? Can I store my own data in a way where I can leverage all your capabilities, all your data pipelining, all of your analytical capabilities, your visualizations, your dashboarding, all of these things in a way that allows me to separate myself and isolate myself from my vendor or vendors? How do I get to a common data model that either I own or a different third party's IP, is a different third party's IP? So if I wanted to move, I could move and not be so tied to those vendors.
Okay, interesting. I still kind of like how to put it correct, how to put it correctly. I am very surprised that the industry, like the financial industry, or I don't know if it's not fintech, right? Like it's fintech, that's a little bit, that's the what is new. Like how do you describe that, like the primary customer of yours? So what type of what type of the industry that is?
Yeah, so within the financial services space, think about things like you've got banks, right?
Yes.
But you've got more than just banks. You've got investment management houses. So think about your Vanguards or your Fidelities of the world, right? So you've got that aspect of financial services. So you got the big banks, you got the regional banks, all of those. Then you've got the investment houses. But then even beyond that, you have insurance companies, right?
Okay.
So what a lot of people might not understand is in the industry, we call them asset owners, right? Or asset servicers, right? So you're either investing a client's money on their behalf to buy, to buy stocks or bonds or other instruments to grow their capital, or you're the company, or like a pension fund would be another example of an asset owner where, they're actually investing their own money, right, on behalf of the pension plan, right, or the insurance company, the assets behind the insurance company, they own those assets and they're investing it themselves, right? So there are a couple of different types of constituencies within the financial services space. Even banks themselves, right, are providing investment services, non-banking services on behalf of some of their clients. So it's a subsector within financial services.
Got it. So I will just use financial services. So this is what my question is like. So in the financial services industry, sorry, that sounded, so in the financial services, they have so much money, at least, from the buildings, which you would see and office and stuff like that. But then their technology, I'm sorry, it's a little bit outdated. And it's very strange that you actually can provide, like these tools, make business out of that, like with all due respect, like, is this because of all the regulations and all of the things they cannot really move that, like it's just like very strange because, you're talking that, oh, they actually want now to generate data for themselves. They want to basically get out of this constraints which they have. And that's logical because, like the massive, like platforms which they use is not preparing for what's coming next, right? Like all the AI buzz and all of those things. You need to prepare data for the future. And I'm just very surprised that you're basically allowing them or, like enabling them to do that using, like Emissary, and they cannot do that themselves. It's just like, what's wrong with the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, listen, the investment management industry has been around for a long time, and there are all kinds of players in that space, right? There are those that are incredibly nimble, right? So you think about, there are tech companies, and the specific name escapes me, but there's a company out on Long Island that has, since I think it's the 70s, has been electronically trading the markets and for have the best performance across, for decades. They've had, some unbelievable returns on their funds, right? So there are companies that are incredibly innovative, have always been incredibly innovative. But, as with any industry, as these organizations get bigger and bigger, it's hard to be, innovative across, because you put your own business at risk, right? You don't want to be cutting edge anymore. You can't be cutting edge because you put, the whole business at risk by doing some of these things. So, I think that there's a multitude of reasons, but just like anything, every now and then the industry gets a nudge, right? Like I was telling you, the beginning of my career, going into 2000s, the nudge for the companies was Y2K. And I don't even know if you're old enough to know what that acronym still is, but that was a significant problem, and it was a significant nudge, and there was a lot of investment that came, right? The financial crisis of 08, 09 gave a little bit of a nudge, right? And right now we're experiencing another nudge, which is the AI nudge, right? So the cloud movement has sort of helped drag along some of these larger firms into a space where in order to compete, they don't have much choice, right? They need to be able to get to a space where instead of just talking about data being an asset, they can actually make it an asset, right? And as we're seeing, I think, in the industry today, many companies are realizing that while AI sounds really, really great, if you pull back, the onion a little bit and you realize the quality of the data that you have, all of a sudden you realize that you can't do all of those things. So you need to start getting things up. So you look at data observability tools, right? You look at, data, specifically data quality tools, all the data pipeline tools, everything right now is in such flux because everybody's trying to get to the place where they can use the data that they have or realize that the data that they have is unsalvageable, right? And get to that better place. But, to their credit, all of these firms, all the firms that I interact with are very interested in moving that, the line of scrimmage forward to get into the end zone. They're really, trying to adopt in a reasonable, non-risky way, right? A well thought out, way of advancing their data journeys. But listen, there's dysfunction and tremendous success across the industry, just like I think there is any other industry.
So one of the challenges which I deal with is the amount of data. And in my opinion, in data engineering, the only problem is the amount of data. And if your data set is less than a terabyte, you don't have a data engineering problem at all. Like this is just like our, like computers, like personal computers can have this much of memory, and you can just basically push all of that in memory and just like parse it any way you want. So for the financial industry, so you mentioned, like that your, like Emissary is using the SQL Server. So like how much data do we actually talking, like how big of the, I don't know, like how much of the storage you need to have in your system to support your bigger customer? Like how much data they actually have?
Yeah, so it depends, on whether you're talking about the big guys or the low guys. We're doing everything from, gigabytes of data up into low terabytes of data, right? Of movement. I think the question really is around, is that data that is sitting somewhere that they need to leverage with their visualization tools or other things, or is it data that's actually moving, right? So for us, typically, we're not moving, well, with the exception of some of those conversions, right? You're moving off of a legacy platform onto another. You could be moving terabytes of data. The way that we will typically migrate, though, just as a matter of migrating off the platforms that we run off of, we're not migrating all history for all time onto these new platforms. It's terrible practice for where we are. But certainly, many tens or hundreds of gigabytes of data for some of the large shops. But on a regular basis, it's smaller movements, right? They're trying to not the financial industry has long been a batch oriented industry, right?
So that's the reason. So the reason why I ask, I should actually told it in the beginning. Again, learning to do the streaming and all of that stuff.
Sure.
The reason why I ask is that I'm trying to understand what type of the problems each industry is dealing with when they're dealing with the data. Like if you are in the e-commerce, so one of the first things which you deal with is the massive amount of data, because you basically track every user, what they do, what they buy. And if you just look at the sales, and if you build a data model out of the sales data, it will be megabytes. But then you look into how they how did they interacted with your website, and then that produces terabytes of data, and that's the difference. I think for the financial sector, because they were for so long, they always dealt with the numbers. They learned to basically save that, store the data in the way that it would be efficient, and actually they would, have not much of data in the size, but it's still all the data is valuable, right? I think the value per megabyte, it's much higher in your sector than it would be like in the e-commerce, and that's the reason why I ask. So that is really very great. What does it mean is that all the big companies, like the Databricks and others, their primary consumers is like these e-commerce platforms, because they earn money every time when they need to move a lot of data. So they will not really be interested in most likely they will be, but still, I think what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to ask is that, so what is the future for the Emissary? Like, where do you see where you're going with all of that? Because initially I thought well, you guys are screwed. Like there is, Databricks, there is Snowflake, there is, the Azure and Microsoft with all of the data platforms. Like, why would someone would need to use you? But now what I'm realizing is well, it's something different, because it's not the technical problems themselves, is the industry itself and its regulations. This is where, having you is very important, because you have a know-how of what the industry needs to be and how it needs to work. So let me rephrase my question. So what's the future of the Emissary?
Yeah. So for us, I think that there's a fair amount of that niche understanding, right, of what it is that the industry needs to solve for. Right now in the financial services industry, Snowflake is getting a lot of press and getting a lot of traction due to their data sharing capabilities, right? So there's a lot of people that are taking movement towards doing, working with and understanding how to land data in Snowflake. But that by itself comes with its own challenges, right? Because the financial industry, largely still wants to land data, not just in the cloud, not just on Snowflake, but in other places as well. The overriding, sort of context that Emissary has always, had was, be open, right? Be open to where you can take data from, where you can land it, where what you do with it, all of these types of things. We've been very careful to allow for us to not care whether it's Databricks, whether it's Snowflake, whether it's an on-site data store, whether it's Google Cloud, whether it's AWS, we don't care, right? For us, it's about how can we make the user experience, the business user experience, whether or even the technical user who shouldn't be, coding for, a data pipeline, because so many tools exist. Why would you ever, code a brand new data pipeline? For us, it's about enabling that experience and making it as easy as possible, right? In our industry, I would argue that any data pipeline that needs to be created has somebody's already built before, right? So
Okay.
why not allow for some of that sharing, right? You talk about data sharing within Snowflake.
Hmm.
What about metadata sharing of some of the integrations that have been built? What about being able to leverage some of those in order to allow a computer using machine learning and AI to
Mm.
build the interfaces themselves, right? One of the overriding things that we've been working towards as Emissary has expanded beyond data pipelines, we never lost sight of the fact that we think that data pipelines should be 95, 96, 97% built by the computer, right? And then ask for a human to acknowledge that data pipeline looks correct, right? And iterate through it that way. In our minds, there's no reason why anyone should have to build these integrations themselves.
Wow. That's the first industry where I heard that, like that the machines or AI should build up. Well, everyone was trying to build a pipeline, like by the computer without like human interaction, just like humans to confirm that. I don't believe that to happen in the e-commerce because of just like all of the custom signals which we introduce, right? Like, well, it's not like you can't, you can. It's just like I think might be a little bit trickier.
Yep.
However, for your industry, I see how that is possible to become because of all the regulations. So the problem with the data quality is because of us people. Us
Yep.
people introduce data, like trash into the data. We introduce the bugs. If the
Yep.
data would be produced by the machines for machines, we don't need to deal with the data quality. The data quality will be there by design, already
Yep.
implemented. It's us
Yep.
humans who basically like screw up the data. Okay, so I already over the time. I apologize about that. It was really, really
Yeah,
great.
certainly.
So before we, close, like, so in the nutshell, like where do you see, like you and your company being like, like, I don't know, like next couple of years, like what's the big thing which you're looking forward, like to share or to provide to your customers?
Yeah, I think it's really that wholesale data platform, right? It's being able to go to a single place as either a technical or a non-technical person to either visualize the data that you've got, to move it from anywhere to anywhere, and to have the application do most of this for you, build most of these things for you. And whether that's, landing data or analyzing data that sits in a Snowflake data store somewhere or data share somewhere, or it's sitting in your legacy server
Mhm.
stack somewhere, heaven forbid. We will continue to be open, and we will continue to develop software where the software does the work to develop these things. We do not want to be in a world 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where developers in any given company, call it financial services, are developing data pipelines, data integrations between systems. It shouldn't be done. You leave it to applications and computers and companies like ours, to do that for you. Because to your point, for these types of tasks, as long as the data is there for us to understand how the connectivity needs to happen, that's where it should sit.
Yeah, I hear you. So let me then try to summarize our conversation and basically answer to myself and to the viewers, like should the emissary exist?
Sure.
So let's see how that will go. So if you are a financial institution which moves data around, which most likely you do, and you building the pipelines yourself, you hiring the engineers to do that, and you realizing that even having Snowflake doesn't really help you because you're still moving data around, like that is now you just have another system to which you need to move the data into. You should look into Emissary, which is a data platform which allows you to automate the data movement between the platforms. And as I understood, you don't need to be very technical to be able to do that. And that's the self-service tools, which actually should help you to move the data between the different like the source and the destination and all of that things. Am I more or less on the right track?
Yeah, you're on the right track. And in fact, it let me know that there's one key thing that I never mentioned in all of this, and shame on me because it's one of the most powerful things that we have. In order to develop transformations or to develop filters or these types of things, all the capability, like what largely enables our users to do these very complex things, is all natural language. So if you need to build a transformation, you can write it in English, and Emissary will translate that into what it needs to in order to transform the data. So there is no SQL. If you want to use SQL to do something more complex, okay, great. If you want to use Python to do something, a Python script to do something a little more complex, okay, great. But largely what we're doing is we're leveraging natural language capability to transform data in English. So, but yes, your summary is exactly right. But part of that is being able to give people something that's native to them, and C# code is not native to most people.
So you don't need to be a technical at all. As long as you understand what you want to achieve, you don't need to learn Python. So then look, I do see the world where Emissary is very useful and should exist. And I'm very happy about that. And Chris was happy to have you here. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.